most of us affectionately call CalPERS. And what we're going to do today is we have the CEO of the system, Marcie Frost. So we're really happy to have Marcie with us. Thank you for doing this with us. And we're going to have a conversation around a lot of issues surrounding what's happening at CalPERS and what's happening in the state budget and how all of this interrelates to each other. And then as we get into the discussion, you have an opportunity to, I don't know where my video went, but I guess it went away for a while, which probably to benefit. You have an opportunity to ask questions, and I'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. This is a very interesting and encompassing subject. We all are witness to what's happening economically in our state, and we've never seen anything like this before. So we're very much in our uncharted territory. We've seen millions of jobs lost. We don't know how many of those jobs will ultimately return once we're able to get our economy back and safely. This is one of the most challenging issues I think I've seen in my lifetime, facing Governor Newsom and other leaders in counties as to how to safely open back up. This economic strain is being felt, of course, by folks in the counties and in the cities and at the state level. The governor's Department of Finance projected a $54 billion deficit, which comes after years of surpluses. So it's a huge impact, and we really don't know where that's going. There's still a hole probably in that budget. There's an anticipation of federal resources to fill some of the gaps. Got a presidential race going. We don't know exactly what Congress is going to be able to do about that one way or the other. So there's potentially going to be the need to reopen the budget at some point, and we'll see about that. There's no question that public pension costs are a big factor in the overall state budget as well as in local budgets. California has been very, on the whole, we'd say very generous to its employees, and it's very important that we take care of our employees. But I think there's a lot of questions about exactly how we do this and how all of this works. It's a pretty controversial area. Back several years ago, we voted for Proposition 30, which increased the personal income tax on Californians to as high as 13.3%. That's by far the highest in the country, and it's a very volatile source of revenue. So as the economy goes, that source goes up and down. It's responsible for about 3/4 of the general fund of the state. That's pretty unique to California. And there's proposals to increase it again as there's more demands for money, something we're really concerned about because we're hearing a lot from businesses and individuals about, maybe it's time to rethink our commitment to California if there's no ceiling to what the costs could be. And businesses are in a really tough spot these days, trying to make things work. So we're deeply interested to see how the responsibility that we have to our public employees and the way we run the fund interacts with our ability to kind of keep businesses here and actually keep the economy going, which underpins the fiscal stability of the state. It's been said, and maybe we could talk about that, back when we approved Prop 30, virtually all those funds which were going to support schools, a lot of the money was stated to support schools, that all of that money and more actually went for retirement costs. And the schools themselves really didn't see any benefit whatsoever. In fact, they endured additional costs. And if that's the case, it really begs the question is, why are the costs of the retirement system going up so much at a time when the revenues of the state have gone up? It would seem like those things are in conflict with each other. We'll see. We are seeing, we have in the state in November 237 ballot measures on local ballots in California coming up in November, in addition to the state split roll tax, Proposition 15. So taxes are going to be a big issue. We've never seen anything like this before. Of those 237, 167 are general fund measures. They required a 50% vote, not a 2/3 vote. And we suspect a lot of that, although we don't have the data to support all of it, we have anecdotal data that a lot of that is going toward to support rising costs of retirement, pension, retiree health, and other post-employment costs. 37 of those measures, or I think it's 37, are actually in the Bay Area. And the Bay Area Council's view is that we should oppose those because we think that, it's unclear that where those monies are going to go, and that we're just not throwing money into the hole. But we're concerned about, the future of this. We've also seen proposals, in addition to raising the personal income tax, of having a first of its kind tax on assets that was in the legislature, and a tax on unrealized capital gains, and a tax on jobs. So this is for a group that represents employers, this is very concerning. Some of the employers we represent are public agencies with public employees as well. So we have a broad mix of the membership. So there's been efforts to rein in pension costs over the years. Governor Brown's effort, I think there's been some success of this, and I think it's something that if we're determined to do, we probably can do and should do. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcie in a couple of seconds and introduce, setting the stage for this. Marcie joined CalPERS as its CEO back in October of 2016. I hope you're happy with the decision, because we need you, Marcie. She's the 9th CEO of CalPERS and the 2nd woman to head America's largest pension fund. She oversees an annual budget of $1.8 billion with a team of 2,800 professionals, 3 lines of business for the fund: pensions, health benefits, and investments. She has a career spanning 30 years in various leadership roles for the state of Washington, including executive director of the Washington State Department of Retirement System. She's on Capital Weekly's list, number 29th most influential person in the state. I have a feeling you're actually more influential than just number 29, but we'll get to that. Marcie grew up in a poor working class family with 7 brothers and sisters. Her mom relied on public assistance and food banks. So she comes from, I think, an important place, and a place where a lot of us in California are concerned about, how we take care of people like Marcie, like the way Marcie grew up, and others. I think that we want to make sure we have a more equitable society. And a lot of people look to CalPERS to invest in things that would make California more equitable, and there's a lot of push and pull in that. So I won't take you through all the CalPERS data, because I think this introduction has gone on long enough, but I know we're going to get into issues of unfunded liability. We do want to hear about, the returns environment, how much we expect from CalPERS to get in terms of returns versus what's realistic, what the implications of that are, and so forth. So you came here 4 years ago, Marcie. You've been in the job. I'll just kind of ask you the sort of general opening question is, how do you, we've seen some improvements, I think, since you got there, and we're really encouraged that you're taking the opportunity to get out in public and talk about CalPERS and your role and what you need from us to help you be successful in the job. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what you planned for CalPERS and how you're seeing it go so far, and we'll get a little more into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to talk about CalPERS and the work that we're doing here. We certainly know that there are significant challenges for our 3,000 participating employers who have decided to offer CalPERS benefits to their employees. And we always look at, pensions in 3 ways. We look at the investment risk that we're willing to take on in the portfolio. We look at the contribution rates that the employers have to pay, as well as the members have to pay to fund the system, and the benefit levels that have been determined between the legislature and that employer. And then the third is the benefit design. And I think you've seen recent activity in the Supreme Courts around decisions related to benefit changes, benefit design changes. And, the environment, I think, around us in the United States has certainly been pretty active around benefit design changes. And I would think that, or I would, assume that most of those are to increase the risk sharing. But, I came to CalPERS, you're right, I worked for 15 years in the retirement system in Washington State. And, if you look at Washington in relationship to its peers around the U.S., it's a pretty well-funded system. The investment portfolio has a pretty high exposure to private assets, which I think that fund would tell you is one of the reasons they believe that they've been able to be successful in identifying success or defining success us is their ability to hit their assumed rate of return. And for the most part, our 7% assumed rate of return is probably in the bottom half of most of the other US plans. And so one of the things that I noticed in coming into CalPERS is that we had the 7.5% assumed rate of return. And within about 3 months, we were able to work the board and the stakeholders through a decision, and including the employer stakeholders, through a decision that 7.5, based on the capital market assumptions that were present for the asset allocation, the way that we deploy assets in the portfolio, were not likely, the chances were pretty low that we were going to get 7.5. And when you really analyzed and studied the capital market assumptions, it was really closer to 7. If you took the 10-year capital market assumptions and then you took the 30-year actuarial assumptions, 7% was more of a realistic number about what to expect. So we were able to get that done. That decision was made in December of 2016. And for the most part, it had wide spread support between the employer associations, the member associations, and the board. I think we had done a pretty good job of explaining why these numbers didn't make sense, and this was a better approach to make sure that the normal cost of the plan really contained the appropriate funding levels. Because anytime we don't hit our assumed rate of return, that delta between what we were able to accomplish and what we expected to accomplish moves over to that unfunded liability, as you indicated, Jim. And then they're paying us that assumed rate of return on that bucket of money. And that's been a real problem. I think if you talk to any of the employers, I spend a lot of time with our public employers, just really trying to understand, their concerns, the level of transparency that they're expecting from us, the why of our decisions again, and just getting the employers present at a board meeting so they start talking to the board also, not just to us as management, but speaking to the board about the impacts of the various decisions that are being made. I think the other major decision that we made within the first 18 months or so was to lower the amortization period on that unfunded liability. It was out around 30 years. It was at 30 years, and we lowered that amortization to 20 years. So when you talk about pension costs going up, the primary reasons for that happening are the reduction of the discount rate or the assumed rate of return, and then the changing of the amortization policy from 30 years to 20 years. Speaking of the fiscal year returns for this year, it's something the team is pretty proud of. We were able to get a 4.7 return, which, we're not proud that, we didn't hit our expected rate of return, but getting a 4.7 in roughly a 3% environment, if you compare our return to our peers or other US public plans, the team is pretty confident, and the team feels really good about the return they were able to get out of the markets during a very volatile period. Not, that level of volatility probably not being seen since the 08 or 09 financial crisis. And we can attribute that to several things. We can attribute it to the fact that we managed our liquidity really very well. We understood what the liquidity demands would be on the portfolio, whether those were payments. Remember, we paid $25 billion per year in pension payments out to people residing, for the most part, about 90% of the retirees out of CalPERS remain in California. Not sure how they're retiring on the income, because the average benefit is around $30,000 to $35,000 a year. But we are looking at the decisions to make this fund more sustainable. We have a plan, a 10-year plan, to get the funded status, which currently sits at roughly 70%, get that 70% into something that's much more healthy, that can withstand this volatility in the markets. We have to be really careful about the level of risk that we take on, because we're not a fully funded system. When I first came in, we were roughly 65% funded, and as I indicated just a few moments ago, we sit at about 70, just over 70% funded today, but we would really prefer to be above 90%. That makes us feel a lot more confident that we can, ride out any of this volatility, even though, certainly we have a significantly diverse portfolio spread across all of the markets. There's really no place for CalPERS to hide from risk. And 7% is certainly a high return expectation, and you can't be low risk and high return. We have to take on a pretty significant amount of risk to get to that return level. But we want to be really prudent, and we want to use the utility of the team here at CalPERS to manage those risks appropriately. And that's what we're focused on, is getting the talent that we need in the organization to execute on our investment strategy that we've been spending the last 6 months or so really explaining to the public, explaining to the stakeholders, explaining to the members about the need to have more assets that have an expectation of getting us greater than 7%, because not all of the assets that we invest into have a return assumption of 7. They're below that number. So we have to have a pretty significant allocation of the portfolio that we would expect to get a greater than 7%.
Yeah. Speaking of talent in the organization, recently, very, very recently, you've been in the news because your chief investment officer, I think, who came in to try to diversify the portfolio and pay more attention to move more toward private equity, abruptly resigned. There were some accusations from folks about investing in positions in which he had a stake, or maybe some relationships with China, things like that people are sensitive about these days. So could you, I know that has to be kind of a setback. And could you comment on why did this happen, and what does it mean in terms of you being able to maintain at least the 7% return or achieve it over time? And what are the implications for the organization replacing the position, those kinds of things?
Sure, I can. Ben Ming was a candidate who, he had worked at CalPERS for, about 6 years prior to going to China and being the deputy chief investment officer for Sept. And when this job became open, his name was brought to my attention by several individuals. And so we connected him with a headhunter, and we essentially recruited him. But CalPERS can be a pretty tough environment. I hired Ben because Ben is an investor. We need an investor watching over the portfolio. If we're going to get 7%, we need that kind of talent. Ben had a kind of a Wall Street background. He was known by the organization, and he was known to be, a good person, if you will, but also to be a very talented investor. And that's exactly what I was looking for in filling this position. The public nature of what we do, being the largest U.S. public pension plan, it can be a bit stressful at times. We are in the news on a daily basis, and for most of us, we're accustomed to that. We expect that that's going to happen, and that not everyone will agree with every decision that we make, and that's okay. We're okay with the fact that not everyone will agree, and we're happy to sit down and debate our investment decisions or any business decision that we've made. But sometimes what happens, and I've spoken to Mr. Ming about this during his 18 months of being here at CalPERS, what was really difficult for him was the political nature of the job. And my toughest job, the toughest job of the CEO at CalPERS, is keeping politics out of the portfolio. There's $410 billion sitting here in Sacramento, and everyone wants to tell us how to invest it. The people who need to be responsible for how this is invested are the 13 board members and the investment office and the CEO. We have a fiduciary duty to make sure that we can continue to pay member benefits. In order to pay member benefits, we have to hit our return targets. That's first and foremost. So, when you are the CIO at CalPERS, you're a US citizen, and you are attacked because you were born in China, you're attacked because the fund is exposed to passive investments in Chinese companies. It's not anything Ben was doing. We had those positions prior to Mr. Ming getting here. But to have that political nature of the job can be pretty difficult for people when they're really just coming to CalPERS because they're aligned to the mission. They really want to serve. They want to be a part of improving the long-term sustainability of this fund. That's why I'm here. It's why Ben came here, and it's why the next CIO will come here. We don't want someone who wants to use CalPERS in a way that personally benefits them. We want a CIO that comes into this organization that wants to help us solve this problem. And the problem is improving the funded status. And the 7% return hurdle, or this return target, is challenging. It's extremely challenging, and it's going to take the best talent out there to come in and help us to accomplish that. So, Mr. Ming, on the allegations around disclosures, that's not something I can speak a lot about, but that's the FPPC here in the state of California. That is an administrative body, and they'll take a look at this, and they have in the past, and there are a number of investigations that the FEPC has conducted over, a number of years here in the state, also called the Political Reform Act. And if they find that there are problems that should, potentially have a violation or a financial penalty to them, then, they will make that determination. But for us, that matter is closed. Mr. Ming did resign in August, and we have started recruitment for the new chief investment officer with, absolute clarity about what it means to come into this environment, that we need someone who's very strong on the professional side, but probably a little tougher on the personal side as well.
Well, I promise not to apply for the job. My returns don't come anywhere close. And once, I probably could stand to use some advice from you. And, I think it is encouraging that you received, a better than market return for this year. And I know you're proud. I think you beat CalPERS. I think you mentioned to me when we were talking privately. So
not that we're in competition with them.
Not that there's not that it was ever compared those things before. So I wanted to ask, we're in a very volatile period economically. The markets are really high now. Maybe that's obviously that's a good thing, but we don't know we can't really predict tomorrow. But we do see this crowding out effect in terms of public services, in which in a lot of cases of a lot of school districts and local governments, we've seen hundreds of % increase in the cost of retirement over a relatively short period of time. And the only effect of that is going to be a conflict with providing services of public safety and maintaining parks and libraries and all the other services that states and local governments provide. And so we're really concerned about that. And the effect seems to be, well, the solution is let's raise taxes. We don't necessarily want to talk publicly about that those monies are going to go toward retirement benefits. So we find other things we like to talk about, but I think when we examine it, we find that this is actually what's happening. And what can we do? What are the options that you have as I know you don't control the benefit plans; those are negotiated not by CalPERS. So you have a bit of a a firewall there. You just have to provide the returns necessary to support what somebody else negotiates. But what can you do about it? What can we do about it? What would you advise state and local negotiators to do given the situation? I know, you mentioned that the average benefit is, $30-something thousand, and I don't think anyone would find any, that to be challenging, or, we don't want to, fight somebody getting a very modest retirement benefit. At the same time, in some cities in the Bay Area, we've got several retired fire chiefs, all enjoying retirement at the same time. In some cases, each getting over $300,000 a year. So it costs the city, $1 million, for a fire chief who's not a fire chief. That seems to be a little bit on the, on the high side. So how do we balance, our desire to make sure that our employees are properly compensated and taken care of, as at the same time that, the impacts to the overall financial system as you're trying to get CalPERS's finances in order. How do we balance this?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Balance is certainly what we're trying to achieve, and we have started identifying pretty clearly that one of the greatest risks to CalPERS is the employer's ability to afford the contribution rates. We now have acknowledged that is a significant risk to the system. It's in our strategic plan. We update that on a quarterly basis. It's reported out very transparently through our board meetings. You're right. I mean, Governor Brown, you mentioned Governor Brown, and he in 2013, or it was effective in January of 2013, made some pretty significant changes to the new formula, the PEPRA formula, of which, I'm a PEPRA member myself. And so anyone who came in after January of 2013 went into this reduced benefit design with also a salary cap that is indexed to the Social Security salary cap. So
is that for the state alone, or is it for state and local?
I believe it's state and local. Yeah, and but you still have a very large group of classic employees who are continuing to accrue service credit under the old formulas, and there would be people who would say that was the contract when they became an employee of that particular organization, that was the contract in place, that in order for them to accept employment, then these were the wages, and this was the benefit package. But
California rule.
The California, yes, the California rule, but I think every state certainly has its own equivalent to the California rule. The state I came from had something pretty similar to that, that if there was going to be a benefit change, that it needed to be replaced with something roughly equivalent to what was being taken away. So, but I do think California's got some of the strongest protections around pension benefit design. But, you know, that balance is what Governor Brown, I believe, was really, you know, trying to achieve. When I first came into CalPERS, I had a couple of meetings with him. He was still very keenly interested in what was happening and, you know, how were we going to make improvements to the system. And, you know, I think, you know, he felt that it would have been, he could have gone farther if he would have had more, you know, people standing there with him. You know, that's, you know, certainly a statement that I think he's made publicly. But, you know, these are the benefit design options that we have. I think it's something, you know, what I encourage employers to do when they're sitting talking about, you know, whether that's bargaining, and, you know, I'm not going to get in the way of the bargaining that happens between that local bargaining unit and the employer, but it's just really taking a look at the long-term cost impacts of the decisions that are being made today. You know, and this happens everywhere, is that you make a decision today and you look at the financial conditions of that particular employer today, but you don't take the appropriate amount of time to look at what the long-term impacts of that benefit change might be. And so I think I've seen more of the employers working with our actuaries really trying to understand what the long-term impacts of today's decision would be, getting away from that short-termism and really looking at the long-term nature of pension liability. So I've seen a little bit of a change there, would certainly encourage employers to continue doing that, reach out to us. We have a number of actuaries here on site in Sacramento who are here to help the employers. They feel like their job is really to provide effective communication, actuarial valuations, make sure you know short-term and long-term what these costs are going to be. And I would really encourage the employers to take more advantage of that than they are doing today. And then the other is, you know, what we've spoken about, the way that we have to help employers is to hit or exceed, even better, the 7% return target that's out there. And when we don't hit the 7% return target, then it's additive to the unfunded liability side. And that's the last thing we want to do, is continue to add unfunded liability to these plans. So, you know, to the extent that employers or other associations, when, you know, there is, people trying to tamper with the portfolio, or there are politics coming in, like you need to divest from China, you need to divest from fossil fuels. That's my view, is that we have to be very opportunistic. We don't have the option to say, we get 7%, but you can't invest here, can't invest here, can't invest here. That just does not work. Let the investment professionals working with the board figure out how best to get to that 7%. And we are going to have to be opportunistic. We are going to have to make decisions that are not going to be popular with many of our members. Many of our members would prefer that we're not invested in any kind of fossil fuel or carbon assets. Well, we don't see that right now. We don't see a way of divesting from those assets today and still being able to hit our return target. But the other way that we look at divestment is, you want CalPERS to stay engaged with these companies. The moment we divest from a company, they don't care what CalPERS says or thinks any longer. You want us thinking about the risk related to environment, or the risk related to human capital, or the risk related to non-diverse boards. We see this whole ESG issue as really a risk framework, that you want an entity like CalPERS, a long-term investor, not just focused on quarterly returns, but focused on the long-term sustainability of that company. And that's what we do with our engagement. And we do this with companies on a regular basis. We do it through our proxy voting. But you're never going to be surprised by our proxy vote. But you want us to be actively involved, and you want us to have wide access to the markets. And these are not just US markets, these are markets, global markets.
Yeah, I think you're more than 50% invested globally. Is that correct?
Yeah, our global equity portfolio is about 51% of the fund.
How does the state of world markets, and, you know, it seems like we're in a bit of a, you know, moment here in terms of trade relationships and other, other uncertainties. How does that affect your investment decisions and your outlook?
Yeah, well, it's, there's a low growth environment essentially everywhere. Emerging markets, certainly have, a higher growth expectation, which is why we have to pay attention to, say, China and India. Our portfolio is probably a little more tilted internationally than some of our US counterparts, but we have to pay attention to what we think the geopolitical risks are going to be, because our money is deployed into all developed markets. And I think, again, back to Mr. Ming and the attack that he had to withstand personally, and then we were able to get that pivoted over to, well, why is CalPERS investing in China? And I think the federal government has legitimate reasons to be concerned. We've never said and never dismissed these concerns in any way, but we're not the way to solve them. CalPERS can't solve these real issues around trade or these real issues around IP, and that has to be done somewhere else. And we are legally invested everywhere. So if we're invested in China, it's being done through our passive index. But right now, that's where we see better growth than what we're seeing, potentially here in the U.S. Now, we certainly hope that changes. We want a positive outlook for the U.S. We would love to continue to invest in the state of California, to invest here in the United States. We would love to do that. But again, back to that 7%, we have to go to where we can get that 7% marker. And until we can bring that marker down, we're this opportunistic is the way that I have to talk about it, but we have to exploit the markets in the best way that we can.
So you started off mentioning that we CalPERS have a target that's lower than our peers. And I know, talking to some of our members who have operate their own funds and are invested in other funds, the rates can be much higher. And so why is it possible? I think you always have to do the prudent thing and recognize what your return potential is. But is there a strategy for being able to get the numbers at CalPERS up? Because frankly, either you get the returns or you have to charge the employers more, which then goes to the taxpayers and competes against the public services. And you don't have that many options as to how to fill the buckets.
Right. I think scale is certainly part of the difficulty that we had at CalPERS investing $410 billion in relationship to perhaps one of our counterparts who is an $80 billion system or a $50 billion system. Their challenges are going to be a bit different than a $410 billion system. But what we have essentially rolled out on the way that we accomplish a 7% is we need access to better assets. And the way that we've defined better assets are those assets that are expected to perform greater than 7. Typically, that's private equity and private credit. And private equity, I think some lessons that we've learned over the last decade is that we've been a little bit of stop and start. We haven't been consistent in our pacing on private equity, even in the fund of funds. And so we have a lot of concentration in particular vintage years, and we were not deploying capital in the years that it should have been deployed. So there's been a little bit of a hit and miss on the private equity program itself. We also have been too concentrated on investing in funds, and we stopped what we call the co-investment program. And the co-investments, in our opinion, the opinion of the people here today, that should never have stopped, because that helps to remove the fee drag of private equity. Because I think, some of the criticism you hear about private equity are the fees. But for me, if we're paying carry to a general partner, they're doing well, but it also means the fund is doing extremely well if we're paying at that carry, as long as we've negotiated an appropriate agreement, of which I can tell you CalPERS negotiates the best agreements that we can get. But we're restarting our co-investment program. We're restarting our customized investment accounts or separately managed accounts. And then we're also, we talked about these 2 pillars, and it doesn't really matter what you call them. It's just another access point for private equity. Can we invest in late stage venture? We really have missed out on all of the growth in Silicon Valley because of the public nature of what we do. And there were real concerns about intellectual property being exposed by investing through, public pension plans like CalPERS and CalSTRS for that matter. But we think that there are ways to access private equity. We think there are ways to get us up in the deal flow, meaning that we have a general partner coming to us first, second, or third versus 8th, 9th, or 10th on a potential deal that they have. And I think one of the changes that we were able to initiate during the market downturn related to COVID-19 is because liquidity was managed so well in the fund this time. Again, a very strong lesson learned out of the 08-09 crisis. We were actually able to fund deals at a time where some of our counterparts were really struggling with the amount of liquidity they had on hand. So they couldn't take advantage of new deals. They were really focused on, how do I continue to make my, my payroll, my pension payroll. And that work was really done under the leadership of our former CIO. Doesn't mean that the team who created all of those instruments and all of those dashboards and all of the systems are not still there and running them. But Mr. Ming did some pretty extraordinary things in his 18 months here, which is why we need to find another CIO with those same attributes, those same skill sets.
And hopefully stays longer than a year and a half. Some of our members, are really concerned about Proposition 15 on the ballot, the split roll tax, and one of the pretty steady investments has been California commercial real estate. If Prop 15 were to pass, would that concern CalPERS investments in real estate in your home state?
Right, thank you. Yeah, we're monitoring that. I know we've had some of our business counterparts or partners reach out to us and ask us to provide an impact statement, and we do believe that there would be some impact. We likely need to analyze that a little more deeply, but anytime that we're having muted returns, or CalPERS isn't paid what we think it should have been paid because of some tax treatment or some other type of policy, that it will have an impact on the fund. And I think we have to do a little more work on that. But there is some impact. I just can't tell you the scale of it, but there would be some negative impact to it.
Yeah, generally speaking, we're concerned, as I made the point in my opening comments, about business creep from California, wealth creep as a result of taxation and so forth. Is this something that would impact CalPERS, you think, going forward? In what ways and to what extent?
Right. Well, we're invested pretty significantly in the state of California. We do a California investments report on an annual basis. And so you can see the level of exposure that we have within the state. And of course, we should have exposure in the state of California as the 5th largest economy. But I think we should all be thinking about how do we make sure that California retains its marker as the 5th largest economy. And we need companies that are doing well. We need we need small businesses that continue to open. We need Main Street to be working, not just Wall Street, but we need Main Street to be working as well. And that's how we know that the fund has an even better chance of getting to that 7%. The 7%, 51% of that is being invested in public companies, right? We have about 8% as the policy target, but we're roughly 6.5% on private companies, private equity companies. But while that says is the reliance on companies being successful, the companies being able to manage through this crisis in a way that their profits are appropriate, their profits are good, and they're taking care of their human capital, they're taking care of all the other things, but they can't do that if they're not open for business. And anything that ends up into a W-shaped type of, W-shaped type of economy recovery, we're going to be a little bit concerned about. We think it's probably a long U of some kind, but we're watching this very closely. The next year is going to be a really delicate time for CalPERS. We're leading our board through what's called the asset liability management process, which we do every 4 years. And we have the actuaries go back and pull all of the records of the last 4 years of actual experience out of the pension plan. And that would be mortality, the inflation, it'd be the discount rate, it would be salary growth and new entrants. So we take a look at that every 4 years. And then we also take a look at the asset allocation. So if the asset allocation that we did in 2016 says you've got a good chance of hitting 7, but that was with an assumption that we could get to 8%. What I will tell you now is if we can't get that assumption on private equity and private debts up into double digits, it is highly unlikely that we would be able to retain that 7% return assumption. So we're going to be leading the board through all of this. This is why we've been really clear about this. This is what better assets means. This is what more assets mean. We're trying to be, communicate this in a way that everyone understands that there is a challenge. 7% is not easy. 7% is going to take the right kind of team and the right kind of structure, and no more political tampering in the portfolio for us to be able to do this. And we think if all of those things can align, we have a very strong chance of hitting the 7, but it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. And we have to work our board through what is your risk tolerance? You get to decide what the risk tolerance of this 13 board is. That's the first decision that they get to make. And once they make that decision on risk tolerance, then we'll bring them portfolios that match up with their risk tolerance. And the portfolios will say, I want 50% to global equity. I want, 13% to fixed income. I want 10% to private equity. So once they go through and put those allocations in, what does that mean on a 10-year return? And what does that mean on a 30-year return? But again, if we can't up our exposure to some private assets, 7% is going to be very difficult to retain next year.
So what do you see in terms of, you mentioned the political influence and sort of the challenges of, obviously running such a huge fund in such a, incredibly diverse state. And, what's it like working with the board? What's it like working with the legislature? Are folks generally supportive? Obviously we had a little bit of a hiccup with Ben, but, generally speaking, do you find that, Sacramento, understands what you're doing and wants to be helpful, or is it more, so long as you do what, you sort of meet somebody else's needs, which is, as a fiduciary, challenging to do?
Right. Yeah. The legislature, we can start there. The legislature has been, wonderful partners. I think one of the things I identified when I came into CalPERS is we didn't, the CEO didn't spend much time talking to the legislature, including, the chairs of the Public Employee Retirement System committees, or, the staff who support those committees. And every year we'll go and now spend some time talking about the challenges that we have and what the opportunities are. Every time we have a challenge, there's an opportunity, but it usually takes more than CalPERS to be successful at executing on that opportunity. And the legislature certainly has a piece of that. And we used to get, and I'll just give you one example, we used to get a number of bills introduced around divesting from certain assets. And, every now and then there will be a bill that gets dropped, but the pace of those, or the volume of those bills, even, introduction of those bills, has decreased significantly since we started talking about the impacts of divestment on the portfolio. So they've been a great partner. The board, it's a 13-member board. There's been, pretty significant turnover on this board since I've been here. And I think that's a bit of an anomaly, but we've had about 9 of the 13 positions turn over within the last 2 years. And that happens, when a new governor comes in. That happens when there are elections for those board seats. So there are member elections that we run that candidates really perform in a candidate forum where they talk about what they want to accomplish when they're at CalPERS, and then there's a voting process, a balloting process, where people can say, yes, I think this person most represents my interest on this board. And so we have 2 of those next year, and so we'll see what the outcome is there. But the board, they understand the challenge that we have, and this public, I call it the public stage, frankly. This public stage that we're trying to run a public pension plan on can be challenging from time to time. We do our best to be transparent. We do our best to share as much information as we possibly can to everyone who wants to know what we're doing. But there are times that we have to keep certain types of information confidential. And one of those would be, the way that we invest. If we have an idea or a strategy that we need to execute on, we need to execute on that a little bit privately before we can go public about what we did retrospectively. And, sometimes we get criticism that we're not transparent enough. And, my belief in working in another pension system, this system is very transparent about what it does. Now, are there other opportunities or more opportunities to provide more clarity around that transparency? Maybe that information is not being provided in a way that people can have easy access to it, or that they understand it. We continue to try to find ways that we can explain the work of CalPERS. And then the other exemption really is around personnel. But we've got 2 million people in the system, 700,000 retirees and 1.3 on the active side, and they're contributing to their pension plan. And, sometimes, they feel like they're a shareholder, right? They're not a stakeholder, but they feel like I'm a shareholder of this plan, and this is my money, and I don't want my money invested in tobacco. I don't want my money invested in coal. I don't want my money invested in fossil fuel. And we have to tell them that if we divested from everything that an individual member just found distasteful or found too risky, they don't invest in their own personal portfolio in that way. If we did that, it's likely that there wouldn't be much left in the investment universe for us to invest in, and it certainly wouldn't give us the opportunity to get to that 7%. And so, we do our best. I know I've said that a couple of times. Again, doesn't mean that we can't do better, but it's a very, very public environment to run a public pension system. And my belief is that's because of the $410 billion sitting here in Sacramento in the portfolio, not literally, obviously, sitting here, but being managed solely out of Sacramento.
Yeah.
And then you've got CalSTRS. CalSTRS is probably $250 billion system, or a little more than that now. And you just think about the amount of money that's here in Sacramento being managed by the two largest public pension plans in the United States. And it creates some drama now and then.
Yeah, it always sounds good to be big, but being big comes with some challenges. We had a question on divestment, which I think you just answered, but if other folks have questions, this is a good time to to get them in, as we have about 15 minutes left in the program. In terms of transparency, I think it's I want to congratulate you and thank you for coming to groups like the Bay Area Council and saying how can we communicate better? What kinds of issues do we have? How can you connect better to the business community and so forth? So I think that's really important, because I think Sacramento just by itself is a little bit vague, I think, for such a big state. And CalPERS is really very, very important, and the impacts that you have are really important, not just for the people you directly serve, but obviously for the impact all of this is having. You mentioned CalSTRS. There's also a lot of retirement systems around the state. At the county level, we have quite a few of them in the Bay Area that are operated independently from CalPERS. What kind of communication do you hold with the local retirement systems? What do you learn from each other? Is there something we can understand better about how things could maybe function better through more communication?
We do have, I would say we have pretty strong relationships with all of the, the 37X systems. One of the reasons that we need to do that, there's actually a business reason to do that called reciprocity, where you can have service credit between CalPERS and service credit, say, in Alameda or Marin, and there's reciprocity in how you calculate those benefits for a member. But I think even more importantly, there are organizations, it's called CalPERS, and there's an organization called SACRS, and CalPERS definitely participates on those with our counterparts here in California. Those relationships, we believe, are extremely valuable. We can learn from one another. Just because CalPERS is the biggest doesn't mean that we know the best about everything. And sometimes these systems that are, can be a little more innovative. I think we're innovative, but sometimes if you're smaller, you can take a little more risk and be a little more innovative. And I think there is always an opportunity to learn from these other systems, to learn from, CalSTRS, which just is across the river here. But we want to do that. We're humble enough to know that we don't know everything, and that we're better in a group than we are as an individual.
Yeah, I think it's always important to to be in touch, and I have a lot of great regard for some of the local systems that we have here in the Bay Area. What about the relationship with the business community in California? What would you like to see from us? How can we be helpful?
It's one of the areas that when we thought about who else, in our stakeholder groups, and I would say that all the business community in the state of California, there are costs that maybe downstream costs, but there are costs that we need to be cognizant of if CalPERS is not able to achieve that return target, and certain costs go up on the unfunded side. And we wanted to spend more time talking to these business associations about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and where could there be opportunities for us to partner together. Partner together in terms of deal flow. Some of the the business entities we've spoken to certainly have thriving companies or emerging companies. Silicon Valley just being one of those. But there are opportunities for deal flow there. There are opportunities to explain what CalPERS is doing. There's opportunities to explain the impact, that if CalPERS makes this decision, what does this look like maybe farther downstream than what we normally had really thought about or had anticipated in our strategic planning. And I just think it's so important that everyone who has an interest or a stake in CalPERS has the ability to access the CEO, access the stakeholder relations group, access our communications team. But we will always find opportunities, I think, where we're like-minded, that we have similar interest in the outcomes that CalPERS and you as an organization are trying to accomplish. And how can we do that together? How can we partner up more than we really have ever historically done? Do
you find that California investment institutions are providing the the products necessary for you to fulfill what you'd like to do here in California? I mean, I think we're all interested in seeing as much of the funds that we develop here in California channeled back in the state. We know that you're not going to limit the investments into this particular geography. No one would advise that, but we certainly want to see as much as possible channeled back into the state. But what's it like trying to invest in California? Are we doing our job to provide CalPERS with opportunities that meet your criteria?
I think what we've been learning over the last year, I referenced it briefly, is that there are opportunities that we are either unaware of or we've been unable to take advantage of. And to the ones that we're unaware of, I think these types of meetings to really talk about what CalPERS is, what we do, why we do it, and that CalPERS can't do this thing on our own. But there are missed opportunities as well. So for example, at the time that Silicon Valley late stage venture was really opening up here in the state of California, we knew that there was going to be a barrier to entry. There should have been some kind of a task force. There should have been, some kind of a relationship being built, a group getting together. How do we resolve that as a barrier to entry and figure out a way to make this path very clear for CalPERS and CalSTRS? And because that wasn't done, we really did miss out on the growth in our own backyard. And of course, if we can find an opportunity without concentration risk, but if we can find an opportunity to invest in the state of California, we want to do that. We certainly want to do that.
What do you see in the horizon? I mean, we've got this little election coming up for president of the United States.
Yeah.
How does that impact your thinking? I know you're not here to make predictions about the election, but depending upon who gets elected, has that affect this business?
Yeah, we watch markets. Unfortunately, markets react to elections. Markets have been reacting to tweets. Markets are more reactive, I think, than they ever have been. And so I think as sooner we get the presidential election behind us, whatever the outcome, I think that's going to be better for every investor here in the United States, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think probably folks share that. What do you think will happen in terms of the process for hiring the new investment officer? How long does that take to happen? And how far along are you into that process now?
Yeah. So as I indicated, we did hire a headhunter to come in and help us, accumulate a candidate pool. And I will tell you the good news. In my last briefing, we hired Corfair. My last briefing was that a number of individuals, qualified, talented individuals, had already reached out when they saw that there was a vacancy in the CIO position at CalPERS, as well as, Korn Ferry has a list of candidates who they will more proactively reach out to. I think one of the changes that you will see as a part of this recruitment, and we'll be bringing some policy changes to the board, but should the chief investment officer of the largest U.S. public pension plan, should anyone in that role be able to hold any kind of financial interest, right? Whether it's an individual security, whether it's a real estate holding, should they have to put all of those assets into a blind trust? Only because if you're at CalPERS, we're invested everywhere, right? We're invested in real estate. We're invested, right? We're invested in, every public company. So, well, almost every public company, but, we're a universal investor. So you really can't hide from exposure. And whether it's a problem or not, I think from an optics standpoint, from a reputational standpoint, I don't think you can really walk away from that when you're the chief investment officer. So I think one of the policy changes that you'll see, and already speaking to the headhunter about this, is that candidates would have to be willing to put any assets they have into a blind trust.
We have a question from Richard Hedges on the actuarial time frame, the 20 years that you talked about earlier. Other plans have longer time frames. Why did we choose to go to 20 years? Because it does put more pressure on the employers.
Yeah, I think it varies by, some of the plans have a 15-year. I think if you talk to the Society of Actuaries, the ideal amortization is right around that 15 to 18-year mark. The 30-year was on the outer bounds, and our actuary, just within his professional standards, could not recommend a 30-year amortization any longer. Could they have considered other options, 25, 22, whatever? But we did take it down to 20. That fits within the best practices, fits within what the recommendations are of the Society of Actuaries and within the professional judgment of our actuary. His name's Scott Tarando. But when we changed that policy, one of the things that we did do, well, two things, is we only made it prospective. So all the current amortization at 30 years for the old unfunded liabilities remained. So the 20 years only for new gains or new losses. So that helped to, soften the impact a bit. The other thing we did is we created what we call a hardship process. So if we have a particular city or one of the 3,000 public employers who are really having short-term financial difficulties and need to modify the amortization for a period of time, we have a process for them to work with our CFO and our actuary to be able to look at to see if we could say yes to that.
Yeah, absolutely. What is what's it like being a woman who is running the largest pension operation in the United States? It's obviously a great credit to you, and I think we're all really proud to see you there. But are there a lot of other women who've achieved this level in the field? And what advice do you have for women who are interested in achieving what you have?
I certainly, I think I've been really fortunate throughout my career. As you said, I spent 30 years in the state of Washington. I, started my career in Washington as a typist, and really over that 30-year career in 2013 was appointed by the incoming governor to run the retirement system. That put me on the state investment board, on the pension funding council, which is where all the actuarial work is happening, and then what was called the Select Committee on Pension Policy, which was where the benefit design was analyzed and made recommendations to the full legislature. But as a female, I think, I probably am one of the, few females at, this level of a financial institution. And so, the advice I have to other females or other, people who are looking to run systems similar to CalPERS or have leadership positions is just, be persistent, be humble, tackle the problems that no one else wants to tackle. I think that's one of the things I did throughout my career is, I'd find the ugliest problem that needed to be solved and then, work to make sure we had a team that addressed it. And, I haven't felt, I haven't really felt any, discrimination based on gender in my entire career. And I know that I am unique in that way. I've heard a lot of stories counter to that, but I'm very proud of the position I'm in. I think one of the things, if you Google me, you'll also find out that I don't have a formal college degree. That is certainly something that comes up from time to time in a very critical way. But, I had 30 years in the state of Washington. I was running the retirement system there. And, I had a lot of mentors and sponsors throughout my career who really helped me to learn, develop, and grow. And the 13 members of this board who hired me, it was a unanimous decision. It was one of the things I did make sure of when I came in. And, they were interested in having someone who was concerned about servicing the membership, right? Making sure that we could hire a talented team of people. And communication out to the stakeholders. They knew that these threats were out there around defined benefit plans, around retirement security, around the cost of the plan. And they wanted someone who could come in and interact with all of the various stakeholders to explain what we were doing, why we were doing it, and then making sure that every process that we had in place here at CalPERS was really directed at servicing the 2 million members. And that's why I was hired. And I think we've made significant improvements since I've been here. We've certainly not been perfect. Imperfections are everywhere. But what I can tell you is the same mistake doesn't get made twice. If there is a mistake that happens, the team does a post-incident review. We learn from that mistake. I call it failing forward, and you move on. And so that would be another piece of advice I give to everyone is, failure is going to happen. Problems are going to occur. You can't ignore them. You have to create a culture where people feel comfortable putting those problems on the table. If they're operating out of a state of fear, you have significant risk. And so I like this organization. The culture is strong. The culture is healthy. And, people are not fearful of telling me what they think. I'll tell you, I do these Friday web chats. I do daily emails, and people are not afraid to ask tough questions. Yeah. Right. And that's a sign of a healthy culture. So that's probably the last piece of advice is just make sure you work on employee engagement, team morale, and hiring the most talented people you can get, and then making sure that you can keep them.
Excellent. Well, look, Marcie, thank you very much. We, really appreciate what you're doing and your commitment to CalPERS and the state of California. There's going to be a lot of focus on this. During times when the budgets are better and the economy is better, there tends to be less focus, whether that's appropriate or not. In these times, with all of this sort of pressure on raising more revenues, I think there's going to be a lot of conversations that we'd like to have, and we'd like to be a constructive partner with you on how to make you more successful and how to make the state of California more successful. So thank you for taking the time to be with us, and we hope to not have this be a one-time conversation, but a continuing one. And thanks everybody for joining today, and support your local Bay Area Council. We need your help. Thanks very much, and be well.